my talk. Here we go. How he said he living life as a gringo, where you question where you fit in every time you mingle. They say you do this with not enough that. My rapping is really bad. This life as a gringo.
Yes, hello and welcome to another episode of Life as a Gringo. I am Dramos, of course. And it is Thursday, so it means it's time for our Thursday Trends episode. And I am flying solo on today's show. And just fair warning, this is the second to last Thursday Trends of 2022. So next week's Thursday Trends will be my last episode of the year. Then I'm taking a couple weeks off to hang out with the family, travel a little bit, rest, relax, most importantly. And I'm really excited about that. But we're not there yet, so I got to deliver our Thursday trends, our trending stories from this last week or so. And I want to just kind of get right into it, man. There's a lot going on. We have Mexico and Bad Bunny and Ticketmaster, some controversy there over one of his latest concerts. We also will be getting into, man, the shaming that tends to happen in our family for our physical characteristics. Specifically, we'll talk about colorism and abuelas, which we all love our abuela, right? We all love our abuela, but you know, they got some some interesting ways of expressing themselves, some old world ideas. We're going to kind of get into a bit of that. We will also talk about Brittney Griner coming back to the U.S. and how this now has become a political issue. And it's becoming harder and harder to put on this empathy hat and try and extend a hand over to the other side when the other side is just looking for more reasons to be angry and fight. But we'll get into it. And then on a positive side of things for our Mi Gente segment, Oscar nominations were released. And man, we got some Latino representation in there. So we will discuss that. But first and foremost, man, as we always do, let's just get into the nonsense, the BS from this last week. We'll do a deep dive in a segment we call For the People in the Back.
Say it louder for the people in the back.
All right, so let's start in Mexico, where you had this Bad Bunny concert, and you actually had a lot of fans being denied entry to the show. So let's kind of break down the story a little bit. So this was fans' last chance to catch Bad Bunny on tour before him going on this year-long break that he's announced, right? And Bad Bunny has said, quote, 2023 is for me, for my physical health, my emotional health, to breathe, right? So Bad Bunny is planning on taking what sounds like the majority of 2023 off. So if you wanted to see Bad Bunny, this year was your chance, and he was recently in Mexico. Now, the concert did go on, and it happened. People were happy. It was obviously one of the highest, I think, attended concerts in Mexico's history. But sadly, hundreds of fans were denied entry after, quote, an unprecedented number of concert goers were sold fake tickets. And this is according to Ticketmaster. In a statement, they said, they went on to say, quote, this caused an unusual overcrowding and the intermittent operation of our system, which generated confusion and complicated entrance to the stadium, with the unfortunate consequence that some legitimate tickets were denied entry. The company said on Twitter, adding fans who had acquired, quote, legitimate tickets through official channels would be fully refunded. So basically, a bunch of fake tickets were made, and this fucked up Ticketmaster system at the stadium, and people with legit tickets were actually denied entry. And man, I would be pissed. That refund wouldn't be enough for me, especially if you are like a huge Bad Bunny fan. You were in a place like Mexico where, you know, maybe he comes once a year if you're lucky, and this was your chance to see him. I would be pissed off. Ticketmaster has gotten some controversy over something similar happened with like Taylor Swift. I don't remember what it was. I'm not really, you know, too vested in what goes on in Taylor Swift's world, but I know a lot of those Swifties were pissed off about tickets and getting tickets on Ticketmaster. And it's actually gotten to the point that the president of Mexico has publicly asked Bad Bunny to do a free concert in Mexico for all the people who didn't get a chance to see him. And it's a pretty bold ask. I mean, listen, I'm sure Bad Bunny loves, his Mexican brothers and sisters, but the man has done a crazy year of touring, and to now ask him to go out and do another concert because Ticketmaster fucked up, I think is a bit of a big ask. In my opinion, Ticketmaster should actually cover for Bad Bunny to do this quote unquote free show if they really feel bad about it, because that's pretty fucked up. You went, you got the tickets, which I'm sure were hard as hell to get in the first place, and then you were denied entry because of a messed up system via Ticketmaster. I'd be pissed. And we already know how I feel about Bad Bunny. I love me some Bad Bunny. I'd be pissed off. Now, moving on to something a little more touchy, right? A little more personal to many of us, I'm sure. You have this TikTok video that went viral, and this is a really dope article from wearemetoo.com, but it's called TikTok Video Highlights How Many Abuelas Latinas Normalize Colorism, right? And in this video, this guy's pretending to be his grandmother, and like the types of questions that you might get asked by your grandmother or commentary on your physical appearance, right? Now, in this article, they go on to say, it's no secret many of us Latinos sadly grew up with internalized racism and normalized colorism at every turn, right? And I want to pause on that for a second because, this is, I think, one of our generational curses that continues to get passed down. And I think our generation is beginning to have a reckoning with this, which I love to see. But, I can remember, people in my family, talking about, like potential mates for my cousins. And I can specifically remember this, really like nice guy that potentially my cousin was interested in. And the commentary from my family was, he's so nice, it's a shame that he's black. And in 2022, obviously that like is an appalling statement. And I'm happy to say that I don't think much of those ideals exist in my family. Currently, I think there's been a reckoning through a lot of conversations, but back then that was a normal conversation to have, right? And it's shameful. It's terrible. It's a really, kind of gross part of our history and our culture, but it is a part of it, sadly, especially these older generations. And in this article, they go on to say, who remembers family members comparing your skin tone or hair texture to cousins or siblings? If you had thick or curly hair, you might have heard the dreaded, quote, pelo malo comment, right? Meanwhile, a lighter skin tone could win you praise, but a darker skin tone could mean the opposite, right? And I remember my mom's cousin telling stories about how she like ruined her hair trying to straighten it, right? Because she's half Dominican, half Puerto Rican, which is a whole other controversy at the time, which is ridiculous. Especially her father is a black Dominican. But like, she has that curly hair, and I think her brother came out with more straight hair, and it was always this like idea of jealousy, and she would always try and get that straight hair and inevitably, mess up her hair using chemicals and things like that. But again, it's this internalized racism and this shame that is brought upon us by our own family members and our own community, unfortunately, right? Now, going on in this article, they say that many have spoken out about abuelas choosing a white passing nieto as their favorite, right? A white passing grandson or daughter as their favorite. Not to mention the supremely racist, quote, mejorando la raza phrase, right? Urging family members to marry people with light skin. And again, reading it in 2022, I'm disgusted. I mean, it's disgusting anytime you read it, but it was normal, sadly, at a different time period in life, right? Now, this TikToker focuses on the word prieto in his video, right? Or dark, throughout the clip, pointing out how many Latinx abuelas use it as a damaging nickname, right? He starts the video imitating so many abuelas, saying, quote, this one was born so dark, mijo. And they also in the article talk about how prieto was used also somehow as a term of endearment, which is, I think, the irony of our culture as well, which a lot of people who might sometimes see the name of this podcast, Life as a Gringo, and like be appalled at the fact that I'm referencing myself as a gringo. But again, in our culture, in our community, we have so many words that have like double meanings. They have bad meanings. They have good meanings. In this video, he points out how prieto is also a term of endearment. I remember my grandmother called me macho prieto when I was a little kid. So it's really fucking confusing for anybody outside of the community in our culture. But I also think it's just confusing in general for anybody within it, how one time we can be called a word and it's a term of endearment, another time it has a negative connotation, or with the word like gringo, where they can refer to, uh, Latinos living in the States as gringos, but also at the same time it means white person, which, again, causes all kinds of complications when trying to explain ourselves. But in general, I think what this brought up for me, obviously the idea of colorism and internalized racism that hopefully we are correcting with these new generations, myself included. But beyond colorism, I also think there's a lot of shaming that is done by our families in regards to our physical appearance. I know for me, growing up, I was always told I was too skinny. He looks sick. He needs to eat, and they would force all types of different things on me to try to gain weight, right? And I remember, I think it was one of my grandmothers telling my mom, like, you need to feed him. He needs to eat. He's too skinny, right? And it would always be this topic of conversation that I would be like self-conscious about my own physical appearance. And that's just like the tip of the iceberg. Obviously, there's so many different things, and I want to actually continue this conversation in our Ask a Gringo segment, because I think it's really interesting to kind of hear some of the trauma that has been caused by our family members in regards to how they have discussed our physical appearance, and probably unbeknownst to them, the effect that it could have on us as kids going into adulthood. So we'll talk about that in our Ask a Gringo segment. But I wanted to talk about one more quick story here that has been a bit controversial for no damn reason whatsoever. Now, the story I'm talking about here that I'm referencing is Brittney Griner, the WNBA star, who has been returned to the U.S. after serving almost a year in prison in Russia. And she was arrested for allegedly having a vape pen, and then was brought up on, obviously, bogus charges of trafficking drugs into Russia and all of the above. And she was held as a prisoner. And recently she was swapped for a Russian person that was here in the States, who was an arms dealer, right? Now, this should be a celebratory moment. An American who was unjustly being held overseas has been returned, and is able to now spend time with her family, go back to her profession of playing basketball. But of course, in the times that we're living in, and sadly, the polarization that happens politically, this has now become a point of contention, and something that politicians, sadly on the right, are using as a means to galvanize their base. And again, disclaimer, I am trying to have that empathy for both sides, but we have to call out the BS where we see it. And the Republican Party is latching on to straws at this point, trying to find anything and everything that they can do to keep their base angry, right? And that's what I want people to recognize who may vote Republican, who lean right. They're just finding things that they can pick apart and create asinine, reactions to that will keep you angry. And we'll get into why this is ridiculous. Again, follow the facts. But let's just talk about the effects of what we're seeing right now, because Donald Trump himself personally had come out and had gone on his social media website, Truth Social, and said the following, quote, "A basketball player who openly hates our country and a drug smuggler." This is how he described her, right? And this is him now talking about the trade for Brittney Griner and Victor Bout. He called it, quote, "stupid and unpatriotic, and an unpatriotic embarrassment for the USA." Previously, he has also called her spoiled. Obviously, he's lumping her in with people like Kaepernick, that if you have an opinion on this country, you are incredibly unpatriotic. And I love that he called her a drug smuggler when she was caught with 0.7 grams of THC in vape cartridges. Yeah, she's a real drug smuggler. But again, it just shows you the pot that's being stirred. He's finding a reason to galvanize his base. This is why you need to be angry at Joe Biden. Look at that. He is releasing these unpatriotic people and trading them for arms dealers, right? Now, Trump also criticized the deal because Paul Whelan, who is a former Marine, is in prison in Russia and wasn't a part of the deal, right? And that's what one of Trump's major points was. We're releasing Brittney Griner, who's a professional athlete, hates America, and we are leaving a former Marine in prison. Okay, let's table that comment real quick, and let's just show quickly the effects, because this is becoming a real issue in this country now that we have to even address, right? Because you have actually House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy, Republican, saying, quote, leaving Paul Whelan behind was an unconstitutional act by Biden. Okay, I want you to remember that statement. Leaving Paul Whelan behind is an unconstitutional act by Joe Biden, right? Now, let's quickly show the effects that this has on the everyday person, right? Now, reportedly at a Utah Jazz game in Salt Lake City this last week, a prompt to the audience to applaud Griner's return home was met, at least in part, with some sort of derision, right? Some fans in attendance said that they heard as many boos as they heard cheers. So again, look at the effects in the real world. Now, obviously, a place like Salt Lake is incredibly conservative. Utah in general, we've heard many stories of racism from sports players in Utah. But again, it shows you the effects. A person gives a fucking nonsensical take, their cult base ingests it, and then goes out into the real world believing it and is angered by it and is now, feeling motivated even more to, let's get Biden out of office, man. This guy is unconstitutional. Meanwhile, let's go to Fox News, right? I literally pulled this off of the Fox News website. So any Republicans listening, you cannot claim it is fake news. So remember, Donald Trump is criticizing Joe Biden for trading Brittney Griner for this arms dealer, also asking why former Marine Paul Whelan wasn't a part of the deal. Meanwhile, on Fox News, Donald Trump is claiming that he, quote, turned down the deal with Russia to receive American Paul Whelan in exchange for convicted arms dealer Victor Bout, right? And that's ultimately who Biden traded for Brittney Griner. Trump, in his own words, said, quote, I turned down a deal with Russia for a one-on-one swap of the so-called merchant of death for Paul Whelan. Trump wrote on his Truth Social account this last weekend, right? And he said, quote, I wouldn't have made the deal for 100 people in exchange for someone that has killed untold numbers of people with his arms deal. Now, if that's the cross that you're going to fall upon, sure. But you can't have it both ways. And this is the problem with these politicians oftentimes on the right. They want to have it both ways. And you cannot blindly just accept what they're saying to you. On one hand, he's criticizing Biden for not getting Paul Whelan out. And on the other hand, he's admitting he had the opportunity himself to get American Paul Whelan out, and he did not take it. You can't have it both ways. And again, this is what happens. These people are talking out of the side of their mouth. They're just trying to stir it up, just trying to get you angry. And you have, Kevin McCarthy, House Minority Leader, Republican, lackey of Donald Trump, saying that it's unconstitutional leaving Paul Whelan behind. Where was that energy when he was left behind by Donald Trump? Where is your commentary after Donald Trump says, I purposely did not release this man because I did not think it made sense as a trade? If it's unconstitutional for Joe Biden to do it, then shouldn't it be unconstitutional for Donald Trump to not release this person? And this inherently is an incredible example of the hypocrisy and why it is so dangerous what the Republican Party is doing. They are just finding bullshit that they can use to make their base angry and activate them to keep, these idiots in power. That's all that they're trying to do. It's all about power. It's not about what's right. It is about what I can say in the moment to maintain that power, to keep my base motivated so they do not recognize the bullshit that is going on right now and the lack of progression that the Republican Party is doing in any of the issues that they have claimed to be important to them, right? I have a lot more that I could say, but I'm trying to keep that empathy hat on. I want to just point this out. Facts are facts, quotes are quotes. People are documented in saying the things that they're saying. Once again, Republicans, you cannot have it both ways. Donald Trump, on one hand, cannot say that Paul Whelan should have been released, but then himself sat on his hands while Paul Whelan was in prison while he was in office. He had the opportunity to release him. Kevin McCarthy can't say that it's unpatriotic, can't say that it's unconscionable but for Joe Biden to leave Paul Whelan behind, but never has spoken up about the fact that Donald Trump left Paul Whelan behind while he was in office and has admitted to having the opportunity and turned it down. It can't be both ways, right? This is the hypocrisy of the modern Republican Party. And again, I do not care about your conservative views, your ideology. You are entitled to that opinion, but you cannot support this nonsense. It is dangerous. These are people who are just playing their base as a fool, looking for more and more ways that they can make these people angry. And we have seen what happens when you stir the pot. It plays out in the real world in acts of physical violence, and at the same time plays out in the polls where you have people like Herschel Walker, a moron, getting incredibly close to holding a major seat in this country. And on top of that, people like Marjorie Taylor Greene or Lauren Boebert being active Congress people when they have no real interest in passing any sort of policy. They just want to have a platform to talk their nonsense and conspiracy theories on. That is incredibly dangerous. And that, if you are a patriot, if you are somebody who truly loves America, you need to recognize that is a detriment to this country. And you should not care about what letter is next to this politician's name. If they are not here to help this country progress, if they are here just to serve themselves, they need to be voted out, and they do not deserve to hold the honor of public office in this country, regardless of what side of the aisle they fall on. This is bigger than your political party. All right. I blacked out for a second. With that said, we're going to move on from this nonsense, from the BS. We're going to move on to something lighter, some positive stuff that's happening in our community for our Mi Gente segment. Mi Gente. All right, so some positivity here. Always much needed, man. And I want to celebrate some people who are getting their flowers, right? So Oscar nominations came out, and we have a slew of nominations that are going to Latinos, right? I'm going to kind of quickly run down the list here. It's a few. But you have Best Performance by an Actress in a Television Series, Musical, or Comedy. And it's Selena Gomez getting a nod for her role in Only Murders in the Building, which is a guilty pleasure of mine. Of course, much deserved, Jenna Ortega scored a nomination under that same category for her performance in Wednesday. And if she wins, she could become the youngest Golden Globes TV comedy actress winner in history, which is absolutely crazy. I think she's like 20 years old or something like that. Now, moving on, you had Diego Luna nominated for Best Performance by an Actor in a Television Series, and this is for his role in the show Ander. You have Aubrey Plaza nominated for Best Performance by an Actress in a Supporting Role in a Series, Limited Series, or Motion Picture made for television. That is a mouthful. And this is for her role in the show White Lotus, which I just finally finished watching the season finale, and holy shit, that's all I could say. Craziness. She crushed that role, and I think she's half Puerto Rican. You have Diego Galva scored a nomination for his role in Damien Chazelle's 1920s Hollywood extravaganza Babylon. You then have Ciao Papa from the Pinocchio soundtrack, a nomination for Best Original Song, in a Motion Picture. Guillermo del Toro partly wrote the track and also directed the movie. And even better, the Mexican director's movie received a nomination for Best Motion Picture Animated. Right? So Pinocchio had a Mexican director. Amazing. You also had Ana de Armas, and she was nominated for her portrayal of Marilyn Monroe in the movie Blonde. She's nominated for Best Actress in a Motion Picture Drama category. You had Anya Taylor-Joy receiving a nomination for Best Actress in a Motion Picture, Musical, or Comedy. Her role as Margot Mills in the new thriller The Menu, which I haven't seen yet. And then Best Motion Picture Foreign Language, you had the Argentinian film Argentina, 1985, receiving a nomination. And listen, I understand, these are just like some award shows created by white people and this, 10, the third. But at the same time, these are the highest honors that we have in the particular craft of acting and motion pictures, right? And if you are somebody who has busted your ass your entire life and put in a lot of blood, sweat, and tears and sacrificed so much for your craft, you want to be able to be honored. You want to have your time to shine, for the hard work and the art that you've created. I mean, I know that I can say that as, somebody who is a musician and when I look at the Grammys, of course, it's not perfect. Of course, it's been problematic. But at the same time, when you recognize how hard it is to get to a certain level in your career and to create a certain level of art, it's such a wonderful feeling to be honored for your craft. And there's no shame in wanting that. I think two things could be true, where we can be pushing for more inclusion and diversity and this, that, and the third, while still allowing people to accept their flowers for the hard work that they have put into their craft. Now, with that said, man, I wanted to get to our Ask a Gringo segment because I want to hear y'all's responses in this conversation of like families and toxic shaming and all that happens with that. So let's get into it.
Ask a Gringo.
I have a question.
All right, so for this week's Ask a Gringo segment, I simply ask people, did you have family members who shamed you for your appearance? How or why? And yeah, this one went a little bit crazy over here. We got a lot, so I'm going to try to get through a few. Let's see, at El Pisano _ says they called me La Vaca because I had a bigger body frame. And that's absolutely terrible. And it's interesting to me, man. Like, how clueless our family could be, and they think just because they're family they could say anything to us, and it doesn't have any effect. I don't know your family personally. I would assume that most people's families don't actually want to harm you in some sort of way, but they do have commentary. Like, even for me, again, being skinny, and that brought a lot of shame and like a lot of insecurity around me as a kid, and being like scared to go take off my shirt to go swimming and things like that because I was getting made fun of for being skinny. Because my family made it a point to tell me that there was something wrong with me for being that skinny, right? And yeah, I feel for you. I think it's obviously shameful. I would never do that to my kids. There's just something about not having families just don't have a fucking filter. And I really do think that a lot of times, though, even just having conversation with my parents, that they're incredibly ignorant to how much of an effect the things that they do or say or don't do or don't say have, the profound effect that it has on us as children. I really think that people like that, that's just an underreported thing about how, I know everybody says like, oh, kids are, a sponge, but we really are. And we internalize all that stuff. And I think a lot of times kids also internalize anything that happens to them as their fault, right? It's their fault for not being pretty enough, good enough, this, that, and third. It's their fault that their dad is upset, their mom is upset. And I think, parents have to be really conscious of that shit because it has an effect on kids more than you know. And it's something that many of us end up carrying into our adult lives. At Pure Halo BJD, I think I pronounced that right, says, growing up half Italian and Puerto Rican, both sides made unwelcome comments about the other. And yeah, that's gotta be tough, right? Because I can imagine, you wanna feel a part of each side of your upbringing, your ancestry, and if the families are each then bashing the other side for being Italian or for being Puerto Rican, I would imagine, like, how do you find your identity? How do you find pride for either side of yourself when, like, somebody is telling you from a young age, people that are your family are inherently telling you the other side is bad or that part of you is bad, right? And again, it speaks to that like racism that many people have internally and obviously externally if they're spewing it out there in that way. And again, it just shows like the ignorance that adults have to what their actions, how their actions may affect people around them and specifically the kids around them, right? Like, you should be a bigger person and understand that like there are kids involved now, regardless of the racism that you have inherited and chose to continue on. Like, these kids shouldn't be a part of that, right? These are innocent kids. And in general, like, who the fuck cares, right? Like, if somebody found love and it's not within your own community or culture, like, you should embrace that, and allow people just to be happy. It's not your life to control, they're the ones who have to live with it each and every day. And I think so many people, forget that. Like, they think that they have to push their own belief system onto others. And it's just a really fucked up way to be living life. Let's see. At Nani Rene says, all the time and for different things. I'm half Mexican and half Irish. So my Mexican side constantly pointed out that I looked more white and I didn't look like any of them and got called, quote, güera a lot. I also have an aunt who's a year older than me and we went to the same high school. So she would constantly make comments about my height and weight to anyone who would listen, calling me and my friends the, quote, chub club. And since she was my aunt, I was never allowed to say anything back because if I did, it would start a fight between my mom and grandma about how, quote, disrespectful I was. Man, there's a lot to unpack there. And I appreciate you sharing that. Yeah, I think it's funny to me how there's like this tendency to point out, it's like elitism, right? And we're, even in our own families, we're trying to find this like fucking pecking order and who's at the bottom of it that we can shit on, which is obviously what happened with your family and them critiquing you for being, quote, too white. And then I want to actually really focus in on what you talked about, like the idea of being disrespectful just because you're forming your opinion, right? Like this is such a notion that I can remember that I can, hear a lot of people's stories in the back of my mind about where, God forbid you express that you didn't like something that somebody did, that your parent did, that you took issue with it. You're being disrespectful. You're being told that you are being disrespectful, right? And again, as a kid, as somebody younger, a teenager, you're constantly being reminded that your opinion does not matter, or that your opinion, regardless if you are right or wrong, is invalid in comparison to somebody else simply because you are you and they are them, right? And I don't think people realize like how crazy, that first of all, that just sounds in general, but how much of a profound effect, again, it can have on us as kids, right? Like, I think as a parent, there has to be this recognition or as a human being that we are imperfect, right? We are going to get it wrong at certain times. And at the same time, I would want my kids to feel empowered to be able to express themselves like, oh, I'm not feeling respected. I'm not feeling heard. I need to stand up for myself, right? And of course, there's a way to go about it. You're not going to scream and curse at your parents, right? That is disrespectful. But you simply expressing the fact that, your aunt is mistreating you or saying harmful things to you and that needs to be corrected. That's a legitimate expression and argument that needs to be heard, right? And I think especially in a world where you talk about Latin women and the pay gap and you wonder why, aside from the obvious, racism, but also, I think in our community, oftentimes we're kind of taught to just blend in. I've talked about this a bunch, but we're taught to kind of just blend in and just be happy to be there. And I can't help but feel like a lot of that is brought on this idea that we're like shamed for expressing our opinion to somebody who is in a, quote unquote superior position, right? And I think it inevitably could start with your parents or your grandparents or your older siblings. But like, how can that not then translate when you become an adult and your boss does something, your supervisor does something, possibly your spouse does something that you don't like? And I can't see how you wouldn't begin to question yourself whether or not you are in a position to express your anger or your disagreement with the way that you're being treated, right? Like, I would never want my kids, when they become adults, to feel like they cannot express to somebody that they are not being treated the way that they think they deserve, right? And it doesn't matter if it's their parents, if they have an issue, I would love for them to respectfully come to me and talk to me about it. And especially in their adult life, if they feel like their boss or their workplace or a coworker or their spouse, a friend is mistreating them, that they should be able to express that and have their voice and have their opinion heard without being shamed, and understand that they are justified in standing up for themselves, in that situation. So I appreciate you sharing that. I think that's a really important conversation to have. And again, I don't have kids, so I understand that it's really easy for me to sit up here on my my platform over here and spew parental advice, even though I've never gone through it personally. But I do know the effects of a lot of these things. I've done a lot of internal work to kind of like, peel back the layers and see where some of my behavior and where some of my lack of confidence and insecurities have come from. And, a lot of it I've recognized and what professionals have talked about is that it's created when we're kids, and the dynamic between us and our parents and our caregiver in general. So just food for thought for the parents out there. Anybody planning to have kids like myself one day, these are things I'm like taking notes on mentally to try and correct, that those generational curses, those generational traumas that have been passed down, and that I'd like to kind of, put a stop to right now if I can. And with that said, thank y'all so much for participating in our Ask a Gringo segment at DJ Dramos on Instagram. You want to be a part of these conversations. And with that said, man, let's quickly tie everything we talked about today in a neat little bow in a segment we call Conclusion Stew.
Time for conclusion stew.
All right, so first off, we talked about this Bad Bunny story about Ticketmaster fucking up and denying entry to people with actual tickets in Mexico. Your president of Mexico asking Bad Bunny to do a free concert. Now, I mean, Ticketmaster has to flip the bill if Bad Bunny truly decides he wants to do it. My stipulation, if I was him, would be Ticketmaster flip the bill for this free concert because you guys fucked up. I mean, that's horrific if you're a fan and you went through all the trouble of getting one of the hardest tickets in the world to get, only to be denied entry after you paid real money for it. And actually, side note to this, I feel like I didn't expound upon enough. Shout out to Bad Bunny for saying he's taking 2023 off, right? And focusing on his physical and emotional health, right? I think that we're all so scared to admit that we need that time for ourselves. And of course, Bad Bunny has gone hard for a long time. And again, I think it lends itself to the conversation I was having on Tuesday's podcast. But Bad Bunny has busted his ass. He kept his head down. He hustled. He achieved something great. He achieved a lot of his goals. And now he's recognizing that he needs to take a break for himself, that he doesn't need to keep pushing. He doesn't need to keep, getting that next check, that there's value in taking a break for your physical and emotional health. And just salute to him for doing that. To think that an artist at the peak of their career and coming off the biggest year of their career is now going to put the brakes on it and just disappear for a while, is something that's oftentimes rare. People are scared to lose their place in line, essentially, to lose themselves as the top artist or top person in their career, or to lose that momentum. But we're humans, right? My girlfriend always repeats this corny quote to me, but remember, you're a human being, not a human doing, right? So we need that time. We can't always be doing something. We can't always be in that hustle grind mode. We need to take that time off. So salute to him. That's what I'm doing. Not this week, next week. After next week, I'm taking a couple weeks off to recalibrate a bit and unplug, which I'm excited for. Now, this TikTok video about colorism and abuelas, and in general, how we kind of expanded upon families shaming you for different things. It's a very real thing. There are a lot of issues in our community. We have a beautiful, beautiful community, an incredible culture. But again, we cannot ignorantly just turn a blind eye to the negative stuff and the stuff that needs to be corrected. And part of that conversation is the internalized racism and colorism that has happened and become incredibly normal from the previous generations. We need to put a stop to that. There's no such thing as the ideal skin tone or ideal hair texture or whatever it might be. There's no such thing that is just colonialism. That's white supremacy, ideals that have been pushed down upon us, and we've internalized them to think that they're our own, right? And also when it comes to the way our family members speak about us, or even, potentially as a parent, understanding the profound effect that these conversations have on children, the way they internalize them and go on to live their lives as a result of much of the shame that has happened around our parents and our family, who felt way too comfortable critiquing every little thing about us. I love that conversation in general and hearing your guys' stories, because I think that it just continues to bring us all closer, to remind us that we are not alone in our experiences, which obviously don't erase the trauma from those experiences, but at least, for me personally, bring some sort of comfort to know that, that it wasn't just me, that sadly this is like an epidemic when it comes to family dynamics, and that it wasn't truly something, wrong with me, but in general, just like this thing that's been normalized within family dynamics in general, which obviously is wrong. Now, moving on to this Brittney Griner story, again, it just proves why we need all the rational people to stand up, because, somebody like Donald Trump, who had the opportunity to release this former Marine from Russia, chose not to take it, but then goes on social media talking about how Biden is crazy for, not including this guy in the deal and this, that, and the third. Meanwhile, he obviously didn't care about letting this guy rot in jail. Again, you have, Kevin McCarthy calling it unconscionable, but had no problem with Donald Trump doing it. Like, real is real, fake is fake. Facts are facts. It doesn't matter if you are a Republican, Democrat. You have to be able to recognize the hypocrisy in this and recognize the danger in it. These are things that are merely being brought up just to anger the base and to get them fired up, to help these idiots stay in power. And sadly, it doesn't just end up at the voting booth. It also plays out in the real world in hate crimes and public shaming and everything in between, as we see with the rise of hate crimes in this country, to marginalized communities. And we can see the direct correlation, after certain statements have been made by Donald Trump or some other political figure, we then see that, hate crime go into effect in real life. This recent shooting in the LGBTQ club in Colorado Springs, again, is a stark reminder of that. This whole conversation around the queer community grooming, kids for pedophilia and things like that, and drag shows and all that kind of shit. Like, we're seeing the direct correlation, and this is just another one of those things. They're using anger as the fuel to keep their base motivated, and that is so dangerous. And if you are a rational human being, again, regardless of what aisle you fall on, you have to recognize the danger in using hate and anger as the fuel for your political party. Now, on some positive things, I'm not going to go through this whole list, but amazing to see Latin representation at the Oscars. Incredible, performances. Specifically, I know I watched Jenna Ortega on Wednesday, and I thought she was amazing. Aubrey Plaza in White Lotus, I thought was really amazing as well. Selena Gomez, Only Murders in the Building. Those are three I can speak to. But just incredible to see people getting their flowers and to see the dynamic diversity of stories that they're actually being nominated for. I just think is incredible. I think Wednesday's an incredible show. I've seen some back and forth recently from people finding something to critique about it, but I thought there was a lot of really dope representation in that show. And that's it, man. One last Thursday Trends next week until I go on a couple week vacation. I appreciate all of y'all. Support the show, like, subscribe, comment, rate it, review it, all that good stuff wherever you listen. Share it with somebody if you can. I always appreciate it. We're trying to grow this community. Dramos.com for that merch. And that's it, man. I'll catch y'all on Tuesday with a brand new episode. Until then, stay safe. I'll talk to you soon. Peace.